The September sun over Copper Creek did not just burn, it pressed down like a weight meant to break a man's will. The air shimmered above the dusty main street, swallowing sound except for the slow, deliberate creak of the wooden boardwalk beneath worn boots. Out there, in the open where no shadow offered shelter, a boy stood in front of a man who could end or save his life. Noah Fletcher was 14, thin as a fence post, his shirt hanging loose over patched trousers, his boots so worn the leather gaped at the toes. The dust clung to him, to his sweat, to the faint tremor in his hands. Facing him was Ezra Blackwood, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, a man spoken of in the same breath as danger and power. His broad shoulders cut a shape against the blinding light, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of a hat pulled low. He had the posture of someone who had made decisions others did not dare make and lived with them. Behind Noah, half hidden in the heat's wavering haze, stood Eli Carter, 12 years old, hair mussed from the wind, eyes fixed on Noah with a devotion that ignored the world's cruelty. The two had grown up side by side in the orphanage on the hill, bound by the kind of closeness that drew whispers from those who believed boys should not cling to each other that way. Noah's voice broke the silence, ragged and raw. "Please, take Eli. The Morrison gang is coming for me. They think I saw their faces when they robbed the bank. He has nothing to do with it. Please keep him safe." His words carried no drama meant to sway, only the stripped bare truth of someone who had already decided what to sacrifice. Eli stepped forward, his small hand gripping Noah's wrist with desperate strength. "If you stay, I stay." His tone not loud, but stubborn in a way only love young. Unashamed, and certain could be, we promised we wouldn't leave each other behind. The street felt even quieter after that, the only movement the drift of a dry tumbleweed scraping across the dirt. Ezra did not answer right away. His gaze moved between them, slow and unreadable, as though measuring not the danger of the Morrison gang, but something deeper, something he could not weigh with his hands. The stillness stretched long enough for the heat to sting Noah's eyes, but he did not look away. For a moment, it felt as if time itself waited for Ezra Blackwood to decide whether these boys would be separated forever, or whether fate might bend in their favor for once. In the still air of Copper Creek, choices could seal a future. Noah knew the rancher's reputation hard, distant, uninterested in the lives of others unless they crossed his own. And yet, here he was, standing between that reputation and the only person he could not imagine losing. Beneath the merciless sun, with dust lifting at their feet like whispers of past ghosts, a truth settled heavy inside him. The measure of a man was not how he fought for himself, but who he fought for when every other road led to loss. For those listening now, remember sometimes the truest courage comes when you offer yourself up so someone else can walk free. That's the kind of story we tell here at Heartstorie. Stay with us, because what happens next will turn this scorching day to something no one in Copper Creek could have imagined. Ezra Blackwood's voice finally broke the weight of the moment. It was not the dismissal Noah had braced for, nor the cold agreement to take only Eli. "I can take both of you." His words came low, steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. Noah hesitated, caught between relief and fear. He had been ready to hand over his own life for Eli's safety, but now the possibility of bringing him into the same danger twisted in his chest. Ezra's gaze was unwavering. "I've dealt with men like the Morrisons before," he said. "Let me worry about them." The ride away from Copper Creek began under a sky stretched wide with gold and white, mountains standing guard in the distance. Eli, seated behind Ezra on one horse, never stopped watching the world roll past the pines that cut through the sun, the distant glint of river water, the hawks circling high above. It was more land than either of them had ever been able to call their own, and it seemed endless. Noah followed on another horse, eyes alert, scanning the ridges, unwilling to believe safety could be so close without cost. By late afternoon, the mountains had folded around them, and the ranch spread out below pastures alive with cattle, fences running long and straight, the smell of hay mingling with wood smoke. Ezra led them not to the main house, but to a small cabin at the edge of the property. Its door creaked softly when he pushed it open, revealing two narrow beds, a table, a cast-iron stove, and a single window framing the sunset. "This will be yours," Ezra said simply, and left them to settle in. That night, the air inside the cabin was cool, carrying the quiet of a place far from the shouting of town streets. The faint light of the oil lamp painted the walls gold. Eli lay on his bed, turned toward Noah across the small space between them. His voice was a whisper, but clear. "Noah, if we stay here, do you think we could be who we are?" He did not fumble for words. He did not name what they both knew, the bond they had carried in secret through years of other people's judgment. Noah's hand reached across the space, finding Eli's, fingers closing in a grip that felt like an answer. "If you're here, I'm myself anywhere." Outside, the ranch settled into its own rhythm, the lowing of cattle in the dark, the wind in the grass, the occasional creak of wood. Inside, something unspoken shifted. For the first time in longer than either could remember, there was no threat lurking just beyond the door. There was only the possibility that the world could be larger than fear, that two boys could exist without apology. In that quiet, the lesson was not declared but lived. Safety is more than the absence of danger. It's the presence of a place and people where you are not asked to be less than yourself. Morning on the Blackwood Ranch began with a sharp bite in the air, the kind that carried the scent of damp earth and horses waiting in the corral. Noah rose early, his body still tuned to the restless nights of the orphanage. But here there was no shouting from supervisors, no metallic clang of gates, only the distant call of roosters and the muffled thud of hooves. Ezra had given them work to do, and Noah took to it with quiet determination. It was during one of those first days that the test came. A bay stallion, its eyes wild and white-rimmed, had been impossible for the hands to manage. The animal paced the pen like a prisoner, ready to break every fence between it and freedom. Men had tried rope and muscle to bend it to their will, but each failed attempt left the horse more furious. Noah didn't approach with force. He stepped into the pen slow, speaking low, his voice an even hum in the cold air. He did not reach for the halter right away. He let the horse circle him, allowed the distance to shrink on its own terms. The men leaning on the rails muttered in disbelief when the animal finally lowered its head and let Noah place a hand along its neck. Eli found his own rhythm in the kitchen. Rosa, the ranch cook, had been wary of strangers, but Eli's quiet patience cut through her reserve. He listened when she spoke, remembered the small things, how she liked the bread kneaded twice, how she saved bacon grease for biscuits. Soon the kitchen was filled with easy laughter between them, and Rosa began to send him out with warm rolls for the hands, saying, "You've got a way of making people feel they belong." Chico. Ezra noticed, not in the way of a man simply counting tasks done well, but as though he were collecting pieces of a puzzle. At the end of each day, his gaze lingered longer on Noah's steady hands or on the way Eli carried himself without shrinking. It was not scrutiny meant to unsettle. It was as if he were measuring what they carried inside them, searching for something neither boy could name. One evening, the three of them climbed a low ridge overlooking the ranch. The sky had gone deep blue, the horizon still burning with the last of the sun. The cattle below looked like scattered shadows. Ezra stood beside Noah, the wind pulling at his coat. "If you had to choose," he asked, voice low enough that Eli, a few paces away, could not hear, "between your life and Eli's, what would you do?" The answer came without pause. "I'd choose Eli." Ezra's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the pastures. Then, without warning, his words shifted the ground beneath Noah's feet. "What if I told you there was no Morrison gang looking for you?" In that moment, the weight of weeks, the urgency, the fear tilted into something Noah could not yet understand. But he felt the shape of change forming, and with it, the truth that sometimes the hardest trials are not born from the dangers we run from, but from the tests laid before us by those who want to see if our loyalty can survive without them. The night air on the ridge felt sharper after Ezra's words, each breath cutting deeper as Noah tried to steady himself. There was no Morrison gang. The men he had feared in every shadow, the danger that had driven him to beg for Eli's safety, did not exist. Ezra did not soften the revelation. He let it settle, the truth standing between them as solid as the mountains behind the ranch. "I made it up," Ezra said, his tone even, almost clinical. "I wanted to see if you meant what you said about Eli, if you'd really choose him over yourself." He turned toward the boy, the brim of his hat throwing his face into darkness. "I've lived long enough to know plenty of people claim loyalty when there's no cost. But when danger comes, most will trade another's safety for their own." Noah's thoughts tangled between relief, confusion, and the faint sting of having been tested without knowing it. Ezra spoke again, his voice shifting, carrying a weight it had not before. "I lost my wife and my boy to the fever years back. My son, he was like you and Eli. He carried himself careful in front of others, but I knew. I knew because I'd been young once too, and I'd seen what the world does to people who are different." The rancher's gaze drifted toward the dark hills. He didn't live long enough to see a place where he could be himself without shame. "I couldn't protect him from that. But maybe I can do something different now." His eyes returned to Noah, steady and unblinking. "I want to take you both in, not as workers, as family. You'd carry my name. You'd have this land, this home, and the right to live the truth of who you are without looking over your shoulder." The offer seemed too large to hold in the small space between them. For Noah, it was not just a promise of shelter. It was a rewriting of every unspoken rule he had learned in the orphanage, that safety was temporary, that kindness had a limit, that love had conditions. He could feel the warmth of it, yet the caution in him refused to be swept away. "I need to talk to Eli," Noah said finally, his voice low. "This is more than a roof over our heads. It's the rest of our lives." Ezra gave a single nod, as if understanding the weight of that choice. And together they made their way back down the ridge. That night in the cabin, as the lamplight flickered, Noah thought about what had been placed in his hands. A home was not just walls and land. It was the promise that within them, a person would not be asked to trade their truth for acceptance. He began to understand that the rarest gift one person could offer another was not rescue, but recognition, the kind that told you there was nothing about yourself that needed hiding. Winter had settled over Copper Creek, covering the Blackwood Ranch in a sheet of white that glistened under the pale sun. The air held the scent of pine and wood smoke, the kind that seeped into clothes and lingered in hair. In the cabin, a small fire burned steady while Noah held a stack of papers in his hands. His fingers traced the black ink on cream-colored parchment, legal words that carried a weight no wind could scatter. Noah Fletcher Blackwood, Eli Carter Blackwood. The adoption was final. The ink had dried. It was not a temporary shelter anymore. It was family, bound in law and in something stronger than law could name. Ezra had stood with them before the judge in town, his broad shoulders and calm presence an unspoken shield. Now, back at the ranch, the three sat at the breakfast table, the winter light spilling across their plates. It was then Eli spoke, his voice almost casual, though his eyes carried a softness that made Noah look up. "Noah, I knew from the start there was no Morrison gang." The words fell like snow, silent, but impossible to ignore. Noah's brow furrowed, confusion passing quickly into surprise. Eli's mouth curved into a faint smile, though his lashes lowered to hide the glisten in his eyes. "I heard you at the stables that day, talking to Ezra. I knew you made it up to keep me safe, to keep me here." He drew in a breath, steadying it before continuing. "I stayed quiet because I understood. You weren't trying to deceive me. You were trying to protect me. And I wanted to stay here too, in the first place where no one flinches or looks away because of who we are." Noah's throat tightened, not from shame but from the realization that the boy sitting across from him had always been his equal in loyalty. Ezra, standing in the doorway, had heard it all, He stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and rested one large hand on each of their shoulders. Then I made the right choice. He said quietly, "You're not just my boys now. You're my hope." Outside, the snow crunched under their boots as the three of them stepped into the yard. The ranch stretched wide under the winter sky, its fences and barns dusted in frost. Eli slipped his arm through Noah's, a gesture free of fear or the need to hide. For the first time, Noah smiled without scanning the horizon for danger. The wind was sharp but clean, the kind that carried promise. Some stories end with survival. This one began with it and grew into a truth they would carry for the rest of their lives. That family is not always the one you're born into, but the one that sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. And now I have to ask, if you were in Noah's place, would you have told Eli the truth from the start or kept the secret to protect him? Tell me in the comments, and make sure you follow Heartstories for more stories that will stay with you long after they're told.